July of 1937 oversaw a world of extreme destitution and instability. The world economy in shambles, unemployment skyrocketed, and even those who managed to find jobs found their wages devalued each week as inflation made it more and more difficult to live. The only groups who were able to weather this storm without shedding their own blood, sweat, or tears were the aristocratic and capitalist classes. Yes, the elite of every country lost countless millions due to stock devaluation and major loss of productivity, but they did not truly suffer for it. A fortune of 30 lifetimes up in smoke, and it only meant 4 cigars a day instead of 5, or a younger vintage of champagne. In the Volksreich specifically, it was notable that the von Formbach royal house participated in the capitalist game directly, many cadet members fancying themselves businessmen. So, as the Volkish capitalists and aristocrats cooperated to the benefit of the system, the writhing mass of desperation below were left entirely out of sight. 100 million souls had grown and festered and suffered for centuries now, but especially over the last 30 years. Typhus, parasites, and cholera tore through the nation's poor. Thousands slept out in the streets of Stettin alone, stepped over and ignored by the Volksreich's rapidly shrinking middle class. In this time, a man could find himself a clerk one day and a bum the next. If you couldn't manage to claw your way into the upper class, you would find yourself sucked into the shuffling, soot-caked masses, beckoned by the inexorable gravity of their great mass of flesh. But still, they talked. Hunched over piles of burning garbage, under bridges in a thunderstorm, they spoke of radical things. They spoke of Stimme, and they spoke of new hopes ahead of them. Now, with Kaiser Erhard VIII's martial law in place, many of them couldn't even do that much. Some were dragged from their homes and forced to work, and others were arrested for staying out past the urban curfew of 9 p.m., despite the fact that they had no home to obey the order in. Those with homes were forced to house the officers of the Stability Party, and in many cases they were immensely burdensome to the poor families whom they imposed themselves upon. The officers of the Stability Party were around every corner, and were unscrupulous in every way, taking whatever meager treasures they could from the people. This insane system that the Kaiser had built was unlike anything even the most vile despot could dream of, and they did everything short of going door to door and actually killing them. It was in this gloomy atmosphere that the surviving members of Stimme met in secret, namely in graveyards and, ironically, churches, posing as faithful people seeking refuge from the violence outside. Over the course of that month, Chairman Leon Beck and his compatriots, specifically Volkskommissar Albrecht Remensburger and Praxisbeauftragter Joseph Rathenau, called upon their pre-established connections and utilized them to rally organized support. This carefully planned architecture of supporters was labored over for years before the curfew for just such an occasion. Volkskommissar Remensburger, head of the paramilitary group the Arbeiterkorps, tapped their connections in various munitions factories, planted spies in crown properties like textile mills and canning food factories, and clandestinely recruited the disillusioned poor across the country. Praxisbeauftragter Rathenau had his underground printing presses producing a wide array of subversive material, often hidden between the pages of newspapers or Bibles, and he also tried to link up with other leftist groups like the Volkisch Socialist Association, a more moderate pro-democracy group that was far more numerous due to a moderate appeal. The VSA agreed to work with Stimme and pledged the support of its members in the event of organized collective action against the government. Finally, Chairman Beck bided his time, waiting for the work of his comrades to be complete before making his move. Thus, on the 20th of August 1937, Chairman Leon Beck organized a simultaneous strike in approximately 36 places where the Stability Party was known to have lodging. The morning of, the VSA came out in force, striking en masse and absolutely congesting nearly every street in Stettin. During the march, 36 teams of Arbeiterkorps partisans, 4 men to a team, one of them led by Remensburger himself, bombed the locations with dynamite, killing approximately 300 Stability Party officers and injuring 400 others. Upon hearing the explosions all across the city, Kaiser Erhard VIII commanded the beneficent army, who were working in conjunction with the Stability Party, to fire upon the protesters. When they did, the crowd at first shrank away, and a stampede began, trampling many people. However, when the mass found that the shooting was not stopping, and they could not escape due to the size of their march, they decided to charge the line of the beneficent army, and thus they burst through their line, turning the protest into a riot. Stimme handed out guns and ammunitions to passers-by, and Chairman Beck led the charge to secure the city center, giving a speech to all who listened. Toil. You are toilers, branded by the great economic machine of death which they have built for you. You may as well have had the very word tattooed above your brow. And what have you been given for your sacrifice? For keeping their beast fed, fat, and happy for nearly 600 years. You are repaid with murder. Firing squads kill your brothers, your sisters. Strange men sleep in your houses and eat your food, and tyrants don't even bother to feed you bright lies anymore. Indeed, toilers, tell me, are you content with the life you've been given? Or can you see that the stolen treasure of generations lay beyond the golden door? Shatter it, comrades. Shatter it to pieces, and from the smoldering ruin will rise a utopia where you will have a new name tattooed on your brow. Savior. So go forth, like a collective messiah, and spill the blood of the money changers. And so it was in this way that it began, with a slaughter and a speech. The August Revolution was underway. By the time Stimme had taken control of the city, at the end of the week, Kaiser Erhard VIII was nowhere to be seen, soon revealing himself to have fled to Nuremberg, where the crown government set up its base. Within the first month, the general battle lines were drawn, with the north largely controlled by Stimme, and the south controlled by the monarchy. The August Revolution was a conflict characterized by fast-paced, incredibly lethal conflict, much of it taking place either in urban centers or along the dividing line between north and south. A third party soon joined the war, that being expeditionary forces from the Aquitanian Night Watchmen, seizing the opportunity and inserting themselves into the conflict against both sides. For example, bombing several crown factories as well as poisoning the drinking water for a quarter of Stettin, all in the hopes of demoralizing them. It was highly effective, and the Night Watchmen took a sizable western portion of the Volksreich, including the Rhineland. Meanwhile, the industrial might of the crown was met with the massive amounts of impoverished ideologues that made up the population of Stimme territory. Dire innovations were pursued to mitigate the advantage of the people, namely the first widespread use of chemical weapons. This lit a fire in the hearts of the workers, as such barbarism allowed them to further dehumanize the ruling class. Irish and Japanese forces were sent to help defend the crown, as the monarchy was their only ally and the central member of the Eurasian alliance. Irish forces were divided to help defend against the Aquitanians in the west and attack the communists in the north, getting behind their lines. However, after about 3 or 4 months, 5,000 men defected to the communist north and became a lethal mobile unit called the Squad Radfil. They specialized in long-distance marksmanship and helped to harass supply lines leading to the crown forces in the south. The Japanese volunteers numbered 10,000 and at a certain point turned the tide of the war with the capture of Erfurt. Erfurt was held for 3 months, and when it became clear they couldn't hold it, the 1,000 men inside committed ritual suicide, which was frowned upon by the Japanese government, a constitutional monarchy, but still wildly popular amongst the rank and file. Fighting lasted until August 13th, 1938, when Nuremberg was besieged. Artillery fire from within the city devastated the Arbeiterkorps, but when they ran out of shells, the oppressors were overwhelmed. As they began to look for the Kaiser within, he was departing from the city in an armored train. A daring chase ensued, with the communist forces firing upon the train from trucks and even laying traps for it further down the track, but it wasn't enough. The front passenger cars of the Kaiser's train detached and continued on its way even faster than before. Bitterly, Kaiser Erhard von Formbach VIII had escaped to the court of Imperatore Carolambris Musuros, despot of Ifriqiya. Though, as soon as he crossed that southern border, the Civil War was over, and the August Revolution was a success. The Arbeiterkorps discovered the train was a treasure hoard, and filled with 1,000,000 priceless treasures, like the original Volkish flag from the 800s, Guntram's mask, and millions of court treasures made of gold and silver. Chairman Leon Beck stood atop the downed train and gave a short speech. The tyrant has been driven from the homeland, but our work is not yet done. As the coward flees south, there are squatters in the west, as well as leering eyes from every corner of Europe. But we will be staring back. The Volksreich is dead. Long live the Volksreich. For the first time since Kaiser Guntram the Monster betrayed the dreams of the family that adopted him, desecrating their memory by turning the von Bauer peasant kings into true aristocratic oppressors, the proletariat finally knew true freedom. For the first time since 1359, 579 years later, they had returned to their namesake of the Volksreich, the People's Empire. The capital was moved back to Schwarzburg, and the Red Lion banner that had flew over the von Formbach monarchy was torn down and replaced with the flag of Stimme, a red hammer and sickle in a silver star on a white background. But before Chairman Beck could move forward with any of the party's goals, the head of the VSA, Rudolf Gauff, demanded a referendum on democracy and whether indeed the Völkisch people would have it. Leon Beck said an election was unnecessary, as the dictatorship of the proletariat was at hand and would prevent subversion by foreign powers. Gauff, regardless, demanded it. Beck acquiesced and allowed the referendum to take place at the end of the week. On the 19th, however, as votes were just about done being tallied, the polling place in Stettin was raided by the Arbeiterkorps, and Volkskommissar Albrecht Riemensberger provided supposed proof that Gauff had been corrupted by the Aquitanians and promised great riches in exchange for neutering the Great August Revolution. Around 8 p.m., Gauff was pulled from his home into the street, given a 10-minute trial, pronounced guilty by Praxis Boftrauger Rathenau, and executed for crimes against the Völkisch people immediately. Chairman Leon Beck, upon hearing this, was shocked, and though he didn't doubt their honesty in the matter, he punished the two for not first consulting him by having them help the various reconstruction efforts in the city themselves. The results of the poll were never known, and the validity of his evidence was never confirmed. But they had little time to dwell on the incident, as the night watchmen on the western border were pushing further into Völkisch territory and establishing networks abroad to help stoke foreign insurrection. The work they had to do would not wait for the Völkisch people, and the socialist future would not simply come to them if they did not combat counter-revolutionary activity. Thus began the reshaping of the Völkisch spirit, remade through steel, steam, and socialism.